Good day, I'm Jamila P. Kayabyab from BSE 1D. My topic for today is all about views of agrarian reform in the Philippines. History of agrarian reform. It is 100-year history of unfinished reforms after the colonizers invaded the country. Before the Hispanic period, there were no owner cultivators, only communal lands. Agrarian reform in the Philippines seeks to solve the centuries-old problem of landlessness in rural areas. Probably, the farmers' qualified beneficiaries, tillers, or farm workers who are landless or who own less than 3 hectares of agricultural lands. Because of the agrarian problem, the farmer is poorer. They cannot afford to pay more taxes, and thus, the government cannot raise sufficient revenue with which to support its operation. In an agrarian society, cultivating the land is the primary source of wealth. Such as a society may acknowledge other means of livelihood and work habits but stresses the importance of agriculture and farming. They have been the most common form of socio-economic organization for most of recorded human history. Agrarian reform on the different eras of the Philippines. First, pre-colonial times before 16th century. Spanish era 1521 to 1896. And lastly, American era 1898 to 1935. Pre-colonial times before 16th century. Land was commonly known as barangay. Barangay is a small unit of government consisting of 30 to 100 families administered by the chiefs. Everyone in the barangay, regardless of status, had access to the land and mutually shared resources and the fruits of their labor. They believe and practice the concept of stewardship, where relation between man and nature is important. Land cultivation was done commonly by kaingin system or the slash and burn method, wherein land was cleared by burning the bushes before planting the crops, or either land was plowed and harrowed before planting. Margta's Code seems to be the only recorded transaction of land sale during this time. This tells us about the selling of the Panay Island by the natives to the 10th Bernean Datus in exchange of a golden salakot and a long gold necklace. Spanish era 1521 to 1896. The colonial government at this period introduced a pueblo agriculture, a system wherein native rural communities were organized into pueblo and each Christianized native family is given a 4 to 5 hectares of land to cultivate. The pueblo agriculture practiced no sharecropper class or landless. The native families were merely landholders and not landowners. By law, the land assigned to them was the property of the Spanish king, where they paid their colonial tributes to the Spanish authorities in the form of agricultural products they produce. The Spanish Crow made a law in 1865 ordering landholders to register their landholdings. Only those who were aware of these decrees benefited. Ancestral lands were claimed and registered in other people's name, Spanish officials or local chieftain. As a result, many peasant families were driven out from the lands they have been cultivating for centuries or were forced to become tillers. As smart tillers were abused, exploited, and deprived of their rights. The Revolution of Peasants and Farmers in 1896 articulated their aspiration for agrarian reform and for just society. Women also fought for freedom and played an important role in planning and implementing the activities of the revolutionary movements. The revolutionary government confiscated the large landed estates, especially the friar lands, and declared them as properties of the government. In Malola's Constitution, 1896, Article 18. American Era, 1898 to 1935. Philippine Bill of 1902, this law provided regulations on the disposal of public lands, wherein a private individual can own 16 hectares of land, while the corporate landholdings can avail of 1,024 hectares. They also gave the rights to the Americans to own agricultural lands. Realizing that being landless was the main cause of social unrest and revolt at that time, the Americans sought to put an end to the miserable condition of the tenant tillers and small farmers by passing several land policies to widen the base of small land holdings and distribute land ownership among the greater number of Filipino tenants and farmers. Government initiatives on agrarian reform. Manuel L. Quezon, 1935 to 1944. Manuel Rojas, 1946 to 1948. Elpidio Quirino, 1948 to 1953. Ramon Magsaysay, 1953 to 1957. Carlos P. Garcia, 1957 to 1961. Diosdado Macapagal, 1961 to 1965. Ferdinand E. Marcos, 1965 to 1986. Corazon C. Aquino, 1986 to 1992. Fidel B. Ramos, 1992 to 1998. Joseph Ejercito Estrada, 1998 to 2001. President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, 2001 to 2010. Benigno C. Aquino, 2010 to 2016. Rodrigo R. Duterte, 2017 up to present. Manuel L. Quezon, 1935 to 1944. President Quezon laid down a social justice program focused on the purchase of large haciendas, which were divided and sold to tenants. This administrations was responsible for establishing the National Rice and Corn Corporation, or NARCC, and assigning public defenders to assist peasants in court battles for their rights to the land. Budget allocation for the settlement program made it possible for the program to succeed. Widespread peasant uprising against abusive landlords continued. In addition, the outbreak of World War II put a stop to the landowners and tenancy interventions during this period. Manuel Rojas, 1946 to 1948. Republic Act No. 34 was enacted to establish a 70 to 30 sharing arrangement between tenant and landlord. 70% of the harvest will go to the person who shouldered the expenses for planting, harvesting, and for work the animals. However, due to lack of support facilities, these farmers were forced to resell their lands to the landowning class. This failure gave basis to doubt the real meaning of the land reform program. President Rojas negotiated for the purchase of 18,000 hectares of lands in Batangas owned by the Ayala Zubel family. These were sold to landless farmers. Elpidio Quirino, 1948 to 1953. Through Executive Order number 355, the Land Settlement Development Corporation or LASEDECO was established to accelerate and expand the peasant resettlement program of the government. However, due to limited post-war resources, the program was not successful. Ramon Magsaysay, 1953 to 1957. President Magsaysay realized the importance of pursuing a more honest-to-goodness land farm program. He convinced the elite-controlled Congress to pass several legislation to improve the land reform situation. Out of the targeted 300 haciendas for distribution, only 41 were distributed after its 7 years of implementation. This was due to lack of funds and inadequate support service provided for these programs. Landlords continued to be uncooperative and critical to the program, and land ownership and tenancy problems continued. Carlos P. Garcia, 1957 to 1961. There was no legislation passed in his term, but he continued to implement the land reform programs of President Magsaysay. Diosdado Macapagal, 1961 to 1965. President Diosdado Macapagal has considered the father of agrarian reform. It was during his term that the Agricultural Land Reform Code or RA number 3844 was enacted on August 8, 1963. This was considered to be the most comprehensive piece of agrarian reform legislation ever enacted in the country at that time. Ferdinand A. Marcos, 1965 to 1986. President Decree Number 27 became the heart of the Marcos reform. It provided for tenanted lands devoted to rice and corn to pass ownership to the tenants and lowered the ceilings for land holdings to 7 hectares. The law stipulated that share tenants who work from a holding of over 7 hectares could purchase the land they tilled, while share tenants on land less than 7 hectares would become leaseholders. Corazon C. Aquino, 1986 to 1992. Various sectors recognize agrarian reform as a worthwhile social investment in terms of the teller status. This improved particularly those within landowners retain areas or unholding subject for coverage. It's during this administration that the present adjudication system was introduced. This gave TAR the original and exclusive jurisdiction over agrarian disputes as quasi-judicial powers. Also, livelihood and agro-industrial projects promoted, and a program of support services was intensified to help farmer beneficiaries become productive and transform them into entrepreneurs. Fidel B. Ramos, 1992 to 1998. The Ramos administration is recognized for bringing back the support of key stakeholders of CARP by bridging certain policy gaps on land acquisition and distribution, land valuation, and case resolution. It is also created for enhancing internal operating system and strengthening the capabilities of the DAR bureaucracy. This administration is also credited for tapping more resources or help implement the program. Failure in enforcing the installation of some farmer beneficiaries on awarded lands became an issue for this administration. Critics say that non-physical installation of FBs been the norm rather than the exception. Joseph Ejercito Estrada, 1998 to 2001. This administration saw the urgency of land distribution and believed that it can be served if it built on farmers' capacities to pursue their own development. One of the first things this administration did was rework performance target by focusing on the number of hectares of land distributed, coupled with an accounting of farmer beneficiaries and the specific croplands and farm system covered. President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, 2001 to 2010. The GMA administration has adopted the Bayanihan concept as the implementing framework for CARP. Bayan means people, anihan means harvest, and bayanihan means working together. Applied to CARP, bayanihan means as united people working together for the successful implementation of agrarian reform. This administration is also credited with heightening agrarian case resolution by introducing a quota system to compel adjudicators to work faster on agrarian cases and train farmers into paralegals. Benigno C. Aquino, 2010 to 2016. Under the governance of President Aquino, the DAR, which is the lead agency for CARP, implementation is bent on sustaining the gains of agrarian reform through its three major components: land tenure improvement or LTI, program beneficiaries development PBD, and lastly agrarian justice delivery AGD. Together with the efforts to fight graft and corruption by the president, it is imperative to have institutional reforms within DAR as a complement to the above-mentioned DAR components, as well as give credence, transparency, and accountability at all sectors of the DAR bureaucracy. Rodrigo R. Duterte, 2017 up to present, renewed his administration's commitment today to pursue the full implementation of the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program or CAP. As he graced the 51st anniversary celebration of the government's land distribution program. Speaking during the event at the Department of Agrarian Reform there in Quezon City, he noted that is only by empowering farmers that the country would achieve the sustained growth of its rural economies and eventually the nation's inclusive progress. As President Duterte acknowledged the gains of the DAR in the implementation of CARP in the past 3 decades, he nonetheless stressed the need to finally accomplish the ultimate goal of the program through the administration agrarian reform. And that's all. Thank you for listening.